Well, Cavs fans, the Cavaliers season is officially over. They get gentlemen swept by those daunted New York Knicks, 106-95, the final in Game 5 tonight. Tommy Wild, Spencer German here to reflect on the game and the season with you on the Cavs Insider Podcast. I guess technically that intro is inappropriate. We're not technically doing a podcast episode, even though I said it. This is just supposed to be our postgame report. But hey, the season started with John Rudder making a mistake on the first episode of the podcast, playing the wrong video. Well, might as well end the season playing the wrong video. Why the hell not? It kind of speaks, I think, symbolic, Tommy, if you will, of this series here at
a lot of mistakes overall, or all around.
Yeah. No, it was a mess, really, from start to finish. There's a lot to unpack here. I was pretty convinced that the Cavs were going to play one of their best games tonight. I thought whatever was going to happen in game 3 or 4, I thought they'd come back home. You'd get the role players sort of rolling a little bit. They'd be able to be more effective with the home crowd sort of behind them. And really, that kind of proved to be true because you got Isaac Okoro and Karis LeVert, who Isaac Okoro, by the way, he had 10 points, which at one point was leading the team, which is just mind-boggling. But you got some of the role players doing some nice things, but another example of just it taking way too long for the Cavs to kind of figure things out and get things going. Every time they seem to make it somewhat interesting and get the crowd back into it, and they'd cut the lead to like 8 or 9 or 10. And then the Knicks would just come down the floor, it felt like, and hit a 3 and suck all the momentum back out of the building again. It was weird, man. It was a weird night. You kind of sensed coming in, and I guess one of the examples I used of how into a game the fans are is how busy it is getting to the parking garage here across the street. And I tell you what, Tommy, like I pulled right up at like 4. I thought I was running a little bit late. I got here like 4:50. And I pulled right up and there was not a line of cars at all. And I was like, okay, this is sort of speaks to how people are feeling about this game tonight. And the crowd, there was a few moments when Isaac Okoro hit a 3. There was an eruption when Lamar Stevens checked into the game for really just the second time this series. That got the crowd going. And there was a couple other moments. But otherwise, like you could kind of sense that people felt this series was pretty much over and that this game was more so a formality.
Yeah, I have to, agree with everything you said. And I do think it's interesting getting that fan perspective with you actually being there and, feeling the environment and everything. And even like the Knicks coming down and hitting that 3 when you felt the Cavs were just about to get into it. I think it was in the third quarter too. Like the Cavs cut it to 9. And then it's just those turnovers. I think Garland stepped on, I think it was Garland who stepped on the baseline or something.
Yeah.
And turned the ball right over. It's those little things that, especially in the playoffs, you can't give the opposition an extra possession, and that happened way too much in the series. Kind of going off of the bench, stepping up and playing well. I do think, one of the thoughts I had watching this game is, Karis LeVert, we've given him, and by we, I mean, fans and everybody, on Twitter, been pretty hard on him in a Cavs uniform, but he's really been the most consistent player the Cavs have had this entire series. He had a tough game 1, then a tough first half in the second game, but ever since then, he's been your guy. So props to him, for stepping up and playing well. But overall, just it felt like a weird game. Kind of like you said, the formality of it. But the series kind of felt like it was over on Sunday.
Yeah, you're right about Karis LeVert. And maybe that's where we can start from a player standpoint. Like he was the one guy who consistently, night in and night out, didn't seem rattled by the moment.
No, not at all.
And I made the mistake earlier in the series talking about, this is the first real road test when they were in New York for a lot of these guys. And then it hit me like, there's actually more of these guys in this roster that have been in the playoffs then I think really the only guys who had never had playoff experience were Mobley, Garland, and Okoro. That was pretty much it. Obviously you could throw some other guys in there, your Dylan Windlers or whatever, but those guys aren't
Dean Wade.
necessarily guys that are seen a lot of time anyway. So yeah, like it for the guys that had the most playoff experience, Karras being one of them, he was probably the best really in this entire series of any Cavs player, at least from a consistency standpoint. He had the one in game 3. He played a really bad first half, and people were obviously questioning whether or not JB should have started him. And then he played a lot better in the second half, and it was like, okay. So other than that, though, like, yeah, he's been pretty much it. And I think that really is kind of a microcosm of what was the most alarming and just shocking about this series was, I mean, there's a number of things that come to mind. We can go through as many of them as we can tonight, but just how it just felt like nobody was ready to step up. Nobody was ready for the moment, and they flat out, like Tommy. I don't know if I can remember a series where I watched it, and I'm sure there's probably been some over the years where a team just thoroughly dominated the other team, but I can't remember a series like this where you could just tell that one team was just so much more physical and menacing than the other and cared, and the want to from the other team was there. Like the Cavs just didn't have that factor, and it was so bizarre to me. Like being a young team, you'd think they'd be hungry. The way JB Bickerstaff talks about them scrapping and stuff, like these are all things that we thought were the identity of this team, and they just were not there in the playoffs. It was so alarming to me that that's where we ended up. Maybe, and like I said, maybe the better way to say it is I can't remember a series between two teams that were supposed to be evenly matched.
Yep.
That was this lopsided. Like this was the 4-5 matchup. This series ended up feeling like it was like a 1-8 or a 2-7 with how it ended. 4 games to 1. Your gentleman swept, and you were just physically dominated the entire series other than one game. And yeah, like that doesn't fit the billing of a 4-5 matchup. This series was supposed to be so much closer, and it was just an utter disaster.
I mean, looking back to when we did our preview, I remember we were saying how this was the matchup. People were all like, "This is going to be the best one. This is going to go 7 games, 6, 7 games, evenly matched." And like you said, like, oh, there's no way that the Bucks and Miami are going to go that far. But I mean, that's been that series has been what you think the Knicks and the Cavs would have been. They just felt unmatched, both teams.
From again, we can talk about Donovan Mitchell. He had 28 points tonight, but it felt just kind of like an empty and a hollow 28 points. He was 11 of 26 from the floor. He had 3 turnovers. The turnovers were something the last couple games that really stood out to me with him, because it just seemed like he was having issues getting the ball over some of the bigs when they'd step out to guard him, fitting it into passing lanes where Knicks players had their arms sort of disrupting the passing lanes. It was just a very bizarre series for him. Listen, I give him a lot of credit because, and this isn't to say that the other guys don't care, and I only got to see really one other player, and that was Darius Garland, but he's kind of younger, and I'm sure he's processing this a little bit differently. But Donovan, you could tell, felt this one. Like in his post-game comments, he felt that this series fell kind of in his lap or on his shoulders, and he let the team down. And I put out there on, you can go to Cavs Insider _FN, our social media channels, and I put the quote out that he said in his press conference about just how the thing that's going to keep him up at night is that he wasn't the player that he needs to be for his teammates. And you could tell that this one was really, really eating at him. And you feel for him in that regard, but then at the same time, like, and listen, and he owned it. He said, like, any of the criticism that comes with this, I have to live with that. But you're going to get a lot of that for him this off season, because that's 2 years in a row now that Jalen Brunson has eaten his lunch. And if like this could be a matchup that you see down the line again in the playoffs between the Knicks if they're here to stay. So you have some questions now about the type of suit. He's a star, don't get me wrong, but the type of star that he is, particularly because you're judged on these moments more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, agree completely. I think the one thing that jumped out to me in his presser was someone asked him what he wishes he would have done better, and all he said was make shots. I think
Yeah.
that pretty much sums it up right there. The Cavs missed, and Donovan Mitchell included, missed so many open shots this series,
Yeah.
and he's saying like, he's missing shots that he usually makes, and from watching this team the entire year, he's spot on with it. It's disappointing, and I think that one of the things you said too was at the end of the season. Now there's a lot more questions than answers we have right now, and yeah, that's exactly one of them. What kind of player is Donovan Mitchell? And I hate kind of saying judging whether players care or not. I don't know. I think that's kind of an unfair thing to do, but he definitely felt
Yeah.
this one.
Well, and to be clear, I'm not trying to say other guys don't care. I
No,
think
for
yeah,
sure.
and Darius Garland made a point in saying like, this one hurts. It's not gonna be easy to deal with and cope with. But you could tell that Donovan was feeling it especially hard just through what he was saying at the press conference. Like there was emotion there that I didn't necessarily feel from anybody else that I sort of saw. So it was
It
just a
felt
different
like
level of it, but that doesn't mean they don't care.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm not saying you
No,
said
no,
that
no, no,
either.
no. I just didn't want the audience to think that like
Right,
I just want to clarify, but yeah.
right, for sure. Um, the one thing also he kept saying too, I mean, he kept coming back to this thing about how it's got to be me. It felt like that was his answer for each of the questions, and that goes to show how much he does care. He's putting everything on himself, and completely, putting the loss on him. And I think some of the criticism is fair, but I do think he is being a little hard on himself,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
how the team showed up.
Well, and let's face it, Tommy, like across the board in sports, where in football it's the quarterback, right? In other sports it might be just like the captain of the team. You want your star players, you want your top-notch players, the best players, you want them to take it upon themselves and take that blame. That's good fan service, right? And so I think it goes a long way that he is willing to accept that, hey, listen, I just played poorly. He wasn't making excuses. He flat out said like, this one's on me, and I feel terrible about it. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. He certainly fits the billing of this blue collar town that we live in,
He even
and
mentioned that too,
that'll
hardworking city.
yeah, he did mention that. And
Yeah,
there's something there that we can tap into, and as we get through the as we start talking off season, I don't want to get to it yet because there are some questions about how important next year is in terms of Donovan Mitchell's future, because you got to go all in. I feel like to convince him like it's worth sticking around. Stay. If we offer you a contract, we want you to be here, and trying to keep him here in Cleveland long term if that's what they want. And I don't know that they have like the time to just kind of like dilly dally and run it back with the same group. You know what I'm saying? So again, that's a conversation for another time.
for sure.
The reason I thought of it was because his mention of being in like a blue collar town and he feels like he let everybody down sort of made me get the sense that he does really want to win for this place. And I think that's great news for fans. But again, we'll talk about that later. You mentioned it, and I'm working on a column on this over at CavsInsider.com. Tommy also writing some great stuff here, post game, reflecting on the series, the game tonight, and the season as a whole. You can find all that again at CavsInsider.com. But more questions than answers. And that's where I think we can sort of transition to as you try to wrap this thing up here in the next few minutes. Like, there is a load of things that the Cavs have to answer to go into this offseason. I think question number one, Tommy, starts with the head coach. We know how it goes on social media. We've been seeing the criticism for JB Bickerstaff all season, really, and the seat didn't get any colder for him with the way that the series played out. I think the biggest indictment on JB has to be just that his team looked woefully unprepared and woefully overmatched in this series, despite being the higher seed, despite having home court, and ultimately, like, that does fall on the coach to make sure that his guys are amped up and ready to go. And I think it spirals from there to maybe in-game decision-making, continuing to trot out the starting lineup with Karis LeVert, which maybe isn't the end of the world because he did play generally well. But when you see Isaac Okoro come in tonight and drop 10 points, it was like, well, maybe he should have been out there because let's face Karis LeVert had some moments like game 3, he was getting cooked on defense against Jalen Brunson. So it was like, yeah, maybe Isaac Okoro does a little bit better there and could knock down some shots. It just didn't seem like he had any sort of adjustments in his back pocket, and he looked like he wasn't really ready for the moment either in some regard.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this yesterday a little bit with the head coach, and I'm still not there saying that we need to make any super big decisions right now. On the head on JB, I think he's done a good job, and I'm hoping that it's a learning experience for everyone. They keep talking about this learning and getting this experience, and I hope that you talk about the experience for this team. I mean, he's part of the team. He's the head coach. He's learning just like they are. So I'm not there where I feel like we need to have a head coaching change, but I do think that started next season, depending on how you start in those first 10, 20 games, it may lead to a different conversation.
Well, Tommy, you seem to be more patient than most because
I am.
because I mean you see the tweets, you see the
Yeah.
commentary. There are fans who are fed up already with JB. I'm going to say what I've continued to say. I don't think the Cavs are going to make any rash decisions about JB. I think that JB is a good person. I think that he's been the right coach. From what I can tell, he's been the right coach to this point with this group. And he talked about afterwards, like he had the comment that every day he's come to work he's never had a bad day at work with this group. Like he's loved coming to work with these guys. And it seems like they love working with him. So that's all great. The question for me becomes like, is he the guy to take you to that next level? Because this roster, that's the goal, right? Like, okay, you get bounced in the playoffs this year. Next year, expectations are going to be higher. And you have to find the right guy to be able to get you deeper into the playoffs, making the adjustments. We see this all the time in the NBA and in other sports where like there's a coach who sometimes gets you back on your feet. And then there's the guy who takes the reins and he can get you. There's a guy that can get you to a point, and then a guy that can get you to that next level. And I think there are valid concerns about whether or not JB is that guy. I'm not saying he's going to be fired. I think he probably is back for at least next year, and they're going to reassess maybe up until the All-Star break or maybe beyond into another playoffs. But I think he's back next year. But again, as I've continued to say, like I can't blame fans or anybody who feels inclined to have some sort of reaction that is, I'm ready to move on from JB. I've seen enough.
Yeah, when you talk about me being patient, I'm a big fan of consistency. I think the consistency is, something that everyone wants to have. So if you're just keep trying to, I mean, this is Donovan Mitchell's first year with JB Bickerstaff as his head coach. This is Evan Mobley's second year. Like, I do think consistency plays into that, and I don't think that just automatically going and getting another coach is the right solution. And I said this kind of in that podcast yesterday too. If that's the case, you better have someone in mind, because if you let JB go and all of a sudden there's no one available, because you had said Nick Nurse, but I was kind of thinking about that during today too, and went back and looked at it, and it was like, I don't know if I want him as my head coach after seeing what happened to the Raptors the past 2 seasons. So I think that, not saying that isn't an option, but you better have someone ready to go if that's the decision you make.
It's a good point by you, Tommy, because that is the big question, right? Like it's easy to sit here and say, fire the coach, he's not it. But if you don't know who that next guy is, or you don't know that you're going to get a surefire thing on the other side, and you're just kind of throwing darts and hoping everybody wants to find the next Steve Kerr, right? Who they want to find the guy in the broadcast booth that comes in and transcends your organization. But that's like a once in a lifetime, find. Like there's no guarantee that you're finding that the next Steve Kerr is walking through that door if you move on from who you have right now. So I do think that's a big reason why the Cavs are going to exude some patience with this. But there's going to be fans. You brought up Nick Nurse, who were sitting there saying Nick Nurse has won the title. I want that guy. So the other questions that come to mind.
Tyloo won a title, and they fired him, pretty quickly once the ship started going south. So
that is true. That is very true.
Can you throw a comment up on here for us really quick?
Yeah, I actually was going to throw Tune In Sports.
Yeah,
had this one. I don't know if you were going to pick the same one, but the team is just so soft and no effort tonight. This leads into another question that I have as we sort of conclude this conversation here a little bit. But as we go into the offseason, some big questions exist about the roster construction of this team, and whether or not this group, as currently constructed, can be a title contending team in, I don't know, the next couple of years, right? And this series was an eye-opener for me, Tommy. Like, I thought the Cavs were just going to keep trending in the right direction, ascending. There was room for growth and all these different things. I don't know that I see that now. Like I see things a little bit more clear that I think Jared Allen at this point in his career kind of is who he is. Evan Mobley, there's room for growth, but if Jared Allen's going to get pushed around like he did in this series, I think he only had 4 rebounds tonight. Like that's not going to cut it. Like it's just not going to do it. And you're going to have some serious looking in the mirror to do for the Cavs front offices to figure out what the right recipe of players is moving forward. If they're going to get to that next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes with another one of the comments up there. We definitely need a better bench and bigger wing players that can shoot. Totally agree with that. And I'd said this as well earlier. I think obviously, you wish the effort was there a little more. I still see just two of your big men starters just playing tired after with all the size the Knicks are throwing at them. Going into next season, you need to have a center that can come off the bench, be physical, grab rebounds, because they just didn't have that this year. Robin Lopez is great to come in and hit those hook shots at the end of the games when you're up by 20, but that's not.
People were so excited about Robin Lopez too. I remember when he signed, it was like, oh, we found our backup center. It was like, oh god.
I still think we should never let Moses Brown go. I mean, he was the perfect bench player in my opinion. I thought he played great at the end of the season last year. And on top of a wing player that can shoot, there's a couple that I have in the back of my mind right now, but that's definitely a different conversation to have. There's one still playing in the playoffs right now that I think the Cavs could go out and get. But like I said, that's kind of a teaser for a different video we'll do.
Yeah, no, we'll get to some of that stuff. But yeah, listen, the roster makeup is going to have to change. The bench is obvious. Everybody like that one's glaring. Anybody who, I guess, even remotely pays some semblance of attention to the Cavaliers could use that as a talking point that the bench was just terrible this year. And on some level, to go back very briefly to the JB conversation, we wanted him to make adjustments, yes, but how many adjustments could he make with the players that he had on the roster? So in some ways, it's like he was kind of failed by the roster construction as a whole anyway. And some of that too, I guess, plays into was it worth giving up Kevin Love if he could have been a role player off the bench for you? So I guess we can maybe have that conversation as well. But there's a lot of just internal discussions to be had about, yes, the bench and how to put the right role players around Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, Allen, but also with the starters and whether or not this iteration will work long term. If Jared Allen isn't going to get more physical, I don't know that he is long for Cleveland. Evan Mobley, I think you assume he's a centerpiece of this team. You assume maybe Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland or both are. But yeah, this is going to be an offseason where you start to see some of those conversations, I think, pop up, and people question the direction of the roster building. So Kobe Altman certainly has a lot on his plate for the upcoming summer.
Yeah, and I mean, we just talked about Karis LeVert being the most consistent player in the series, and is he back on the team next year? Well, I mean, what does his contract look like?
I think he is.
I think he is too. I think he is too. But what I'm saying, like, what is that contract? Is that a 4-year contract? Is that a 2-year contract? I mean, that's a question to have too.
That is probably going to be priority number one for them. And to be fair, you can't not bring back LeVert because if you let him walk, you're losing a player that that at least can do something for you. He's like one of your only role players that you feel like you can get any sort of production out of. Yeah. And so you have to bring him back and hope that either A, he continues to be more consistent for you, or B, he has like a stretch where he's good and then you can just flip him at the trade deadline, which is something they weren't able to do this year because he had played so poorly early in the season. So I think LeVert's back, but we can have a deeper conversation on him later. Let me ask you this, maybe to get us out of here, because I mentioned the name Kevin Love and how this bench was a disaster. Do you think having his presence, his leadership, his veteran prowess, and just the extra scoring thrown off the bench, would that have done anything to change this series? Like, would it maybe have made it gone a little bit longer? I don't know that I think Kevin Love would have meant that the Cavs win this series, but I do think his presence would have been beneficial in some of these games, particularly as a bench player.
Do I think that one of the best, rebounders over the past 10 years, even though he's in the final stages of his career, do I think he would have been nice to have off the bench? Yeah, I do. Even
Mm.
floor spacing, I felt like the lane just got incredibly clogged for both Garland and Mitchell. With New York size, you have Love out there. At least he can stand in the corner, and he is, like you said, he is that threat. I've thought about that a lot this series.
Let's wrap with this. All the negative talk aside, and I know there's a lot of that tonight, both I think you and I have certainly hit on a lot of the negatives with this team right now, and it's easy for those things to sort of stand out. And I know social media is just a absolute dumpster fire right now in terms of people just throwing shade at the Cavs, and rightfully so. Like they played these games, they lost them, they got to live with that for the next several months until the next season begins. But I will say, and JB Bickerstaff talked about this, you can't manufacture this environment, these games, this atmosphere, this stage. It's impossible to replicate it in practice. Donovan Mitchell can, tell the guys, hey, this is what MSG is going to be like, and they still won't be ready for it. So at the end of the day, yes, the series didn't go the way it should have, or that most of us thought it was going to go. And it was a disappointing series all around because people were picking the Cavs to win. We all thought this would at least go 6 or 7. Even if the Cavs lost in 7, it would have been like, all right, well, at least they put up a fight. But this was just an utter disappointment because of the way that they played and the fact that they just got completely overmatched through 5 games. But I do think that there is some valuable experience gained from actually playing in a playoff series that hopefully for the future means good things for the Cavs because they now have those scars to build upon.
Yeah, I was thinking about this after game, I think it was 3 when Mitchell Robinson said that they were rattled. I think it was game 3, or was that game 4?
Yeah, it was game 3.
Game 3, okay. It feels like we love storylines in the NBA. We love even Donovan Mitchell talked about in his presser how the storyline between him being from New York and almost going to the Knicks, now he's on the Cavs and meeting up in the playoffs, and he was sick and tired of hearing about that. But we love storylines in the NBA, and it feels like things that were said off the court about the Cavs being soft and not being aggressive enough and not living up to the moment. You almost feel like that's they're taking note of that for next year. And I think we're going to see a different team next year. If we're like you said, if we're being positive and optimistic going forward, I do think they take some of these things that have been said about them and they're really going to use it to motivate them in the summer, because we know that they like working out together in the summer and into next season to run this thing back and hopefully, go a little further than a gentleman's sweep in the first round.
Yeah, you're right with that. And again, it's hard because these things aren't linear either. Like just
No.
because you lose one year, you win one year, I mean, doesn't mean that you're guaranteed that you're just going to take that next leap the following year. So, I mean, look
Right.
at the Hawks, right? They went to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple years ago, and they haven't been back since. So you just never know what's in store. But hopefully the Cavs build upon this. I know fans certainly hope that that's the case. And we have plenty of time in the coming months to talk more about GB Bickerstaff's future, what this team should do in terms of roster management and moves that they can make and contracts that they should delve out and all of it. As always, you can find all of our stories, all those types of conversations over at CavsInsider.com. I apologize. This podcast or this episode of the Postgame Report went much longer than we anticipated, but it's the end of the season, so I think it was a worthwhile one, and we appreciate those of you who stayed up with us to jump in on the conversation and hear us out. Again, CavsInsider.com. I got a column that I'm working on, should be up maybe not tonight, but at least by the morning. I know Tommy's got some stuff going up there, and as always, you can follow us on our social media channels at CavsInsider_FN as well. For Tommy Wild, I'm Spencer German. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll have lots more episodes of the Cavs Insider podcast to come. Tommy, maybe this week we'll do a sort of a reflection episode. How's that sound?
That sounds awesome. Let's do
All
it.
right. We'll try to do something this weekend or early next week. We'll work on that, but we'll certainly have more episodes throughout the off season to keep you guys engaged. And until next time, have a great night. We'll talk to you guys soon.